This is the Get a Life podcast. Ex-Cult Conversations.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Get a Life podcast, Ex-Cult Conversations. I am Cheryl and we are joined by Richard and Carmen and our special guests from New Zealand, Craig Hoyle and Lindy Jacomb. We're here today discussing a very hot topic that most ex-members have been reading about on the Facebook pages and social media regarding Palmerston fellowship meetings or 3-day meetings. We're not really sure what we're going to be calling them right now. And Craig Hoyle, who is a journalist in New Zealand, had wrote a couple pieces. And we're just going to open up the floor to get into this subject that everybody's been emailing and messaging us about to get into a discussion over. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Craig. And if you can just inform our listeners and viewers on what this hot topic was.
Thanks, Cheryl. So I come at this as a former Brisbane and also as a journalist. I work at the Sunday Star Times here in New Zealand, and the Sunday Star Times has a long history of following what's happening in the exclusive Brisbane church, going back more than 20 years. And so this is the kind of thing, absolutely, that we would be keeping an eye on. Quite a big event for New Zealand when you have 8,000 people suddenly dropping everything to travel to a small city. Everybody notices. And so we're getting emails from members of the public, we're getting emails from people who work in Brethren businesses, the teachers at the schools, everyone wanting to know what's going on. Why are there so many Brethren at the airports? Why are there so many Brethren on the roads? Why are all the buses in town booked up by Brethren? And so we started plugging away and looking into this, and it quickly became apparent that there were fellowship meetings in Palmerston North that had been called at the absolute last minute. When I say last minute, the first fellowship meeting was on Wednesday, and a lot of Brethren only found out on Tuesday. And you can imagine the impact of that. It's chaos. So we had the Brethren schools were closed at very short notice and remained closed for the rest of the week. There were Brethren attending a trade show in Auckland who suddenly packed down their stalls and walked off the site, which of course leaves all the other non-Brethren businesses going, well, what on earth is going on here? Has the world ended for these Brethren?
I might have wondered if they'd had advance notice of the rapture.
They went out horizontally, not vertically, though.
And the rapture may be here, but we've still got to pack our business down and take it with us.
It's true.
Craig, one question I had at first, but you might better answer better than me, is why Palmerston North? Like, for those of you who aren't Kiwis, Palmerston North is not exactly a destination location. So do you want to fill in the listeners with why Palmerston North? It's about 2 hours from a bigger city.
So Palmerston North is a city less than 100,000 people, a couple of hours north of Wellington. It's sort of in the middle of the lower North Island. And I think there are a few reasons why they would use Palmerston North. First of all, it's relatively central in New Zealand, and it has a decent-sized airport, but it's not one of the major metros like Auckland, Wellington or Christchurch. And so when they organise their charter flights and their private jets, they're not having to do a lot of jostling with other flights on the tarmac. I wonder if that's a reason. It's also within bus driving distance for all the meetings, Howard and New Plymouth, Hastings, Gisborne, Napier, the Wellington area. And the other thing is that Palmerston North has one of the biggest, newest meeting rooms in New Zealand, finished in 2020 with all the mod cons. They spent 17 million on this hall. And it's kind of built to what they would now consider to be the gold standard for a meeting room compound, I would call it, because it includes the hall and the school and the campus and co and all of these other different things. And so, yes, this is it. So it's a large, very large church with all the seating in the aisles and foyers. There's capacity for 3,200 people. And then if you start putting marquees up in the yard, you can fit another 500 people. And so it's one of the few halls in New Zealand that's big enough to cycle every single Brethren member in the country through within a couple of days. And
sorry, did you say 3,000 people? Is that into the fixed seats, or is that, the way they also then fill the aisles and the foyer with removable or stacking seating? Is that 3,000 people the fixed seating, or is that all the stackables as well?
So that's the fixed seating plus the stackables plus filling up the foyers.
Okay.
So
okay.
that would be what they would consider the maximum number of people that you could get into the hall itself before you start needing to put up marquees.
Right, and so again, just to think of the New Zealand context, is there about 7,000 brethren or 8,000 brethren?
About 8,000.
About 8,000 now, and so you're saying that they weren't actually all there at one time, but that they were probably cycled through, so that they each had a meeting with Bruce. Is that what you're saying?
There would have been two different occasions. So there was a Wednesday fellowship meeting and a Friday fellowship meeting, and everyone in New Zealand over the age of 5 was expected to attend at least one of those meetings, unless they were elderly or pregnant, or there was some other reason why they couldn't travel. So we saw in Auckland, for instance, they opened up the main hall in Auckland on Coronation Road, which is just around the corner from where I live, actually. And I just happened to be filling up at the petrol station next door and saw the hall was opened on a Wednesday afternoon. I was like, this is highly unusual, and it turned out that they were holding a Zoom version of the Palmerston North meeting in the Auckland hall, so that anyone who couldn't travel could go there to watch Bruce Hales.
Oh, wow.
Coming to a theatre near you. Yeah.
And the interesting part is, my question was, would they play that in real time, or would they play it back after? And they actually played it in real time. So they were watching what was happening in Palmerston as it was happening.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is not sort of like a rugby game with video cameras antics and replays of the best lines and that sort of thing, is it? Is it, just sort of a fixed video of the great man himself? Is it something like that? Oh.
Could you imagine at a fellowship meeting if they did what they do at the rugby and they did audience cutaways, so you could see people's reactions?
Yeah, and the cheerleaders, of course. Yeah.
The cheerleaders, I love it.
So this was called. What do we assume or speculate that this was called this fast and to New Zealand specifically?
Yeah, so interesting situation with New Zealand. We had been leaked various documents, say from the Brethren Ministry, and there was also the letter that was circulated recently about Bruce Hales being unhappy with what's happening in New Zealand. And of course, this has long been the case for the exclusive Brethren. New Zealand has always been seen as a bit of an outlier. If you go right back to when the Brethren movement started here, as early as the 1870s, you had J.N. Darby and J.B. Wigram raising concerns about the way the Brethren behaved in New Zealand. They didn't think they were up to what they considered to be the Brethren standard. And we've seen that pattern continuing all the way through. The same thing happened in the 1950s when JT Jr. tried to get involved in Auckland's matters, and Auckland basically told him to stuff off. And so this is not a new problem for world leaders of the exclusive Brethren. I've always struggled to keep New Zealand in mind. And New Zealand, as a power base for the Brethren, has always been quite restive and quite rebellious in terms of not fully following the rules or not fully complying. And Bruce Hales has cycled through various different methods to try and deal with this. He's tried being nice, he's tried being mean, he's tried the sort of the poor me line, saying none of the Brethren in New Zealand even believe in what I'm saying. I remember when I was a teenager, this would have been relatively new into his leadership, it being said that Bruce Hales said that only 1 in 3 of the New Zealand Brethren actually believed in him and his ministry. And he would make these remarks publicly, and of course at the time when you're in the Brethren, you very much see that as a black mark and a warning that you need to buck up your act. But I think really what it shows is that the New Zealand brethren, by and large, tend to be quite independent thinkers, and they're not afraid to, perhaps not publicly, or perhaps certainly not in anything less than a discreet setting, but they're much more willing to challenge and question what the man of God is saying. And I look at someone like my Auntie Anna, for instance, Lindy Jacomb, who spent her whole life in the brethren, but never, ever agreed with them. And she said as much to me when I was leaving, and you wonder how many other people there are in the New Zealand brethren who are living their lives like this, not saying anything publicly, but they don't agree with Bruce Hales. They don't want to follow him, but they're trapped in a set of circumstances that mean they don't really have much choice.
I think that was even true if you go back to the 70s. We always noticed when New Zealand brethren came over, it was after diamonds were outlawed. It was so much fun to watch. The sisters that came from Palmerston North was the one that we always looked at. They had the biggest diamonds on their hands. And of course, in North America, it had been said we couldn't have diamonds. So they were rebellious all the way back then.
And then there was the story. Remember the story of when JHS Symington went to Palmerston North, the carport incident?
No, I don't know that, Craig. Tell us that. What did you say?
So Symington was in New Zealand. This would have been in the mid-70s. I forget the exact year. And there were fellowship meetings, I think it was, in Palmerston North. And after the meeting, he was in the carport getting ready to leave. And none of the local brethren lined up to talk to him as they normally would. And it became known as the carport incident, with all these questions about why none of the local brethren were interested in talking to the elect.
Oh, that's hilarious. that would be beyond offensive.
Yeah. Oh, dreadfully so.
How dare the people not wait for the breadcrumbs from the table?
Not the people, the dogs.
The dogs, yeah.
Is there a bit of a national tension between Australia and New Zealand in any case, just in general, with Australia being the larger country? Would it be particularly irksome for a New Zealander to take orders from Australia?
Oh, absolutely. And this has been a long-standing kind of tension that's gone on for generations. And when you go back to getting into my sort of obscure brethren history here, but when you go back to the Jack Bishop matter in 1952, part of the reason that caused so much conflict in Auckland is because you had the Australian brethren trying to interfere and tell the New Zealand brethren how to do their business. Yeah. And that spiraled and ended up going all the way to JP Junior in New York.
And that was
New Zealand brethren.
A big walkout, didn't it, Craig?
Yes, so they argued about that for 4 years, and there was a funny story that often got told when I was younger. We're getting a bit off topic here, but the Auckland matters dragged out between 52 and 56, and at one point the elders in Sydney, and this was like pre the Hales brothers almost, but at one point the elders in Sydney decided they were going to go over to Auckland to the care meeting and sort them out once and for all. And Dr. Martin, I think it was, in Sydney at that point, took what was then the flying plane from Sydney to Auckland, and he had his big dossier of evidence to take the Auckland brethren to task. And as he was boarding the flying plane in Sydney, he tripped and dropped the whole dossier into the harbour. And I remember when I was younger, older brethren from Auckland still, this is like 50 years later, still telling the story of how Dr. Martin tried to come and tell them what to do from Sydney and dropped his dossier into the harbour. And how
did they think it was funny?
Business. Yes, they did.
I'm kind of warming to these Kiwis a little.
Well, and even in the system days, it was a big deal because in the farming towns, you had these system guys coming in and trying to tell these farmers how they're supposed to do stuff. And I mean, farmers farmers don't like to keep timesheets. That's the screwiest waste of time ever, you know? And it was this big clash. Yeah, Rangiora. Yeah, the stories that used to come out of Rangiora were just amazing.
Ah.
Yeah, and so I think the New Zealand, the other thing is that, and I was talking to Professor Peter Lynham about this last week. He's had 50 years of experience researching the Brethren movement. I think he himself grew up in the Reading Brethren side, but he was saying that New Zealand, as a power base in the exclusive Brethren, has never fully exercised the power that it has relative to its numbers. They've never had the world leaders in the way that other parts of the world have, which is surprising considering how many brethren there are here. And I think a lot of the elect vessels that have come and gone have been very aware of that. They've been very aware of how much sort of dormant power there is in the New Zealand brethren, and quite conscious of keeping that in check.
That's really interesting, because you've just reminded me, didn't people think that David Bill was going to become the new world leader at one point? He was a Brethren man from further up north, and was that after JSH died?
Yeah, there certainly was. But I mean, I think every part of the world thought that their guy was going to be the guy. You know, I mean, you had the North Americans thinking it was going to be Lloyd Paskritz, and you had the West Australians thinking it was going to be Von Fawkes, and that was just, you know, everyone thinks it's going to be their guy.
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
and there's been a lot of discord though amongst the Brethren in New Zealand, and there's been people that have been leaving. There's been a lot of people leaving in New Zealand recently, hasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely, and this is the thing, those of us who have spoken publicly about our experiences, we know that the Brethren, or Bruce Howes in particular, is insistent that we are opposers and that we're evil. And what I notice is that every time my name goes out there as someone that the Brethren shouldn't talk to, there's an increase in the number of Brethren who do talk to me. And it goes round in circles a little bit. And I've found, you know, for all that Bruce Howes criticises the media, and I remember him talking about the newspapers, Satan's printing presses and so on, through the many years I've been a journalist now, we've found far more brethren willing to come forward and talk to journalists than you would think, based on what Bruce Howes is saying. And I think, you know, you go back to the rat poison incident, those remarks that Bruce Howes made about Lindy's brother, and you know, that all came to light because someone in the Brethren in New Zealand leaked it all to the Sunday Star Times, which is the newspaper I work at. So I think the Brethren here are very, very willing. And it's not even necessarily people who want to leave the Brethren. It's just that they think the Brethren need a bit of course correction, or that Bruce Howes needs to be pulled into line. And there are people in the Brethren who don't intend to leave the Brethren, but are quite happy to pull their own strings to influence or exert what power they can over Bruce Howes, because in the Brethren they have no power to hold him to account. But if they start pulling the external strings, then some of that power does come back.
Yeah. And I mean, we had an insider who informed us that after Bruce got home from Palmerston, he changed the meeting times in Sydney. I just got word. I asked specifically if it was all of Australia. It's not. It was just Sydney and its immediate interchange area, where they changed all their meetings, and they have no in-person meetings anymore, other than Sunday morning, which is not at 6 a.m. anymore. It's at 8 a.m. And everything else is Zoom recorded or in your own home. That's the only meeting that they are going in person for. I think it's important to talk about the way Bruce pushes and pulls with his leniency and rules, and then tightens down, and then lets go, and then tightens down. I firmly believe he does this to show people that he is the one in charge. And if we get down into what was happening inside Palmerston North, the meeting hall and in their tents, like there was a lot of partying going on inside there. And I think, Carmen, you have the actual number of how much thousands of dollars worth of alcohol was ordered for those 2 days.
Yeah, we've been told, and we've verified this with multiple sources, that they went through $100,000 worth of booze, which comes from their internal supplier of Vendemia. But coming from bringing booze into a tent on the meeting room parking lot, personally, I found it really shocking. But if you really stop and think, they proclaim themselves to be a mainstream Christian church. And when I look around the county where I am, and I know this is North America, but I cannot think of a single mainstream or a single church of any kind, whether it's mainstream, whether it's Christian, whether it's unchristian, whatever it is. I cannot think of a single church that would have a booze party in a tent outside of the meeting room or their church. It just doesn't add up.
One other church where they were all drinking was on the stage at Aberdeen in 1970.
Oh, that's fascinating. That is, my mind is exploding at that, Carmen. I agree with you. I just think that's absolutely astonishing. I also, when I was in there, people did not drink alcohol in the car park. I know that over the years there's been various it has happened. Like I remember people talking about years ago, I don't know exactly how long ago, but people talked about the car boot drinking sessions. And I think that was before they had breaks in people's homes. And instead they would load the boots of their cars with alcohol and snacks. And in between maybe, the main meeting and the preaching or something, everyone would go to the car park, open their boots and have like a car boot party. So maybe this was a reinstatement of that, but and really endorsed from the top, or what have you heard about? Is this a new thing to be drinking in the church grounds with the church leadership endorsing and supplying the alcohol? And did people have to pay for that, or was it all on the tab, on the house?
Well, one thing that's really important to know, it was obviously pre-planned because it was ordered and delivered. And I'm being told there was signs in the car park and around the tent that said 1 drink per person. Oh. However, the little cart that was rolling around was refilling at a rate far greater than 1 drink per person. And this is going on in a tent with children running through it.
Mm. What do they call 1 drink? Because I remember being told that anything less than a 50-50 Scotch and Coke was unspiritual.
Right. I mean,
if you take 100,000. So I was going to say, if you take 100,000 and divide it by maybe 7,000 or so attendees, leaving out the children, it's something like $15 a head. How much alcohol do you get for $15 in New Zealand, Craig? Buy a bottle of wine or a bottle of scotch?
Yeah, if you're buying wholesale, then that would be maybe a bottle of wine, Lindy.
And was there food supplied with this as well?
Yes, it was fully catered. Very expensive steak. It was long rows of tables covered with black cloths and food that was being served by all the sisters in their very expensive Burberry scarves with their scarves still on, and all the brothers with their Bibles and hymn books and white books, right under their armpits like they always used to do.
Okay, because I was going to say they wouldn't normally allow in outsiders to cater to be present at such a thing, right? But I presume it was cooked off-site. The sisters didn't have to do that, or was this partly to give the sisters a break from the heavy load? Normally fellowship meetings are an incredibly heavy load on them with regard to cooking and baking. I presume that they still used all of the brethren homes for overnight accommodation, because that in itself.
One of the thought processes was because the locals and anybody, down from the top didn't know anything about this event until after school on Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah.
And the thought process is the sisters didn't have time to provide the food. So when you kind of look at it, go out from the 180-yard stair, probably a couple heavies knew maybe a week in advance and ordered the food. That's kind of what you would suspect a little bit. But definitely the sisters knew nothing about it. The kids at school knew nothing about it until they were home from school on Tuesday afternoon.
And my understanding is that the organising of all the fellowship meetings and 3D meetings is now run by central trusts. Like in New Zealand, there's a central trust that organises special meetings. So the local brethren in whichever locality is picked don't have much input at all, and it's just kind of put on them at the last minute, and all the travel and the catering and so on is organised at a national level. So in a case like this, what may have happened is the National Trust has locked in the details with Bruce Hales and then just dropped the news on the locals at the very last minute.
Right. Yeah, that I'm just thinking back to fellowship meetings when I was in there, and normally you would have, I'm pretty sure you'd have months' notice, but at least weeks and weeks. And it was a big deal, right? Like, and of course it was a huge financial strain on the household because, for example, I remember going out and you would be checking all your linen and buying new entire sets of linen and sheets and towels to make sure you had the very best for your guests, and you would clean your house from top to toe, and you would be filling the chest freezer with baking and cooking in advance. Like, so yeah, that would be such a burden to have that suddenly thrown on you, both with the time and pressure, as well as I'm thinking about the financial burden on households, not only those who were in Palmy, but those who suddenly had to drop thousands of dollars on flights. Have you heard reports of that?
This is speaking to young families who had to deal with this. That's something that comes up again and again, is when you have to take these charter flights, for instance. You're looking at more than $600 a head, for instance. And if you're a family with 4 kids, then you're looking at spending nearly $4,000 almost overnight to go to a one-day fellowship meeting. And there's a lot of discontent and grumbling behind the scenes that there's huge costs that were just dumped on young families.
Yeah,
that's
we
crazy.
Still have photos of them scurrying around at the grocery stores last minute, trying to fill up what they needed. So, I mean, you think of the pressure that would have put on those females, like the brethren wives, and like to have to shrink all that in 24 hours,
Yeah, and so any listeners just to make it really clear for any listeners who aren't familiar, you're not allowed to stay at non-brethren accommodation, or that used to be the rule anyway. We have heard of some reports of people doing that, sneaking in to stay into motels lately for business trips. But for an event like this, a fellowship meeting, you have to stay with brethren households, and that's partly why brethren have got such massive houses, is because you're expected to be able to suddenly host 50 people for a meal, or to host 10 or 20 people to stay the night. Like, we would empty out our garage and be lining it with beds, like Marae style.
And the way they were getting around that, like I remember even before I left the last fellowship meeting I went to in Christchurch, because they're now using these charter flights, they're just flying people in the morning and then flying them out in the evening. So they're trying to have as few people as possible staying the night. Which makes it, considering the money you're spending on it, like you might be gone from your hometown for less than 12 hours and yet still expected to show up more than $600.
Oh my God.
And when you get there, you might just end up sitting in the foyer looking at a screen that you could have watched from your home meeting room anyway.
Yeah, that's bonkers. So maybe that's partly why the meal thing happened, because it's like, heck, let's give them something. Like, I mean, I remember in the days of Fun Day, so this was probably 2006 or 7 or 8, I remember then, and that was a Fun Day, was like an event to raise money for your local school, and we had alcohol served then, and it was like the best top shelf stuff, and it was also eye fillet steak and that sort of thing. And I remember people saying, oh, Bruce Hales has said we are the king's people, so make sure that there's Blue Label whiskey and eye fillet steak. And so, yeah, that was 15 years ago for a fun day event for raising money. So it actually makes sense that this is the same mentality we're seeing as, hey, yeah, we're the King's people, we deserve the best, let's roll out. I guess it's what he would want, right? He wants to be served that stuff. And did somebody say there were also bands playing, like providing live entertainment?
Yep. Brethren bands playing in the parking lot. And they were, and my first question was, what kind of songs were they playing? Because you're in a church parking lot, right? So was it hymns they were playing? Oh no, it was all the country and western songs is what I've been told. It was not gospel music. It was not hymns. It was country and western.
Could you imagine going to fellowship?
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine going to a church parking lot for one of the fall festivals or fall bazaars? I don't know what they're called in New Zealand, but I mean, over here, if there's a band playing in the parking lot or whatever, they're playing old hymns and everybody's singing along. But no, in this mainstream Christian church, they're playing country western.
Oh, that's hilarious. Please tell me they played songs like Body Like a Back Road and things like that.
Or Take This Job and Shove It.
Sorry, we lost you there, Craig. You're back. Go ahead.
Oh, I love that. Richard, Folsom Prison Blues. That's awesome.
But yeah, and I was told too that on Wednesday night, the young people went over to the band and started singing along with them. So it was getting to be kind of a spectacle in the parking lot, and the heavies were not happy.
You mean they almost had a mosh pit? Like, is that what you're saying? That the young people were gathered in front of the band and were like, oh my God, they might have nearly touched each other.
Of course. Anyway, the heavies were right there to try and dissipate, so that it wasn't quite so obvious this whole, country western band is going on in the parking lot. But the kids didn't move. No, they were having fun. They were having a good time. It's the first time they've seen it, so they were going to make it count.
It is fascinating.
This brings back memories of the days of JP Junior, where he would get people to bring their guitars into the halls and pull them up on stage and be singing songs. This was in the 60s. It's like really strong reminders of that era.
You're right, Craig. Yeah, it is.
Bruce always said that the next Aberdeen would happen underneath his reign. So, I mean, I think we are getting mighty close to that.
Just taking a few steps back, was there some specific troubles in New Zealand immediately before this event was organised that might have triggered this very last minute arrangement? Did we hear there were some walkouts at some meetings or some areas, or some specific unrest in the weeks preceding this event?
I can't speak to that. There's definitely been unrest in various localities. I think from a broader point of view, what Bruce Hayes would be particularly worried about in New Zealand at the moment is the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse and Care, which expanded its scope of reference to look at the exclusive brethren along with other closed religious communities. And the Commission has interviewed dozens and dozens of former brethren, and they have been putting a lot of their concerns to the brethren. And so Bruce Hayes will no doubt be very aware of what the Commission of Inquiry is looking at in relation to the brethren, and the final report is due out in March. So we're really in a crunch point now for how the brethren are going to address this Commission of Inquiry. And there was talk, I don't know if this has been confirmed, that the New Zealand brethren have been told not to shut off or withdraw from anyone until the Commission's findings have come out. So I don't know if anyone else can confirm that.
Yes, I've heard that. There was quite an extensive amount of trouble in the top of the South Island, if I understand it correctly. Some quotes say a large percentage in one interchange area walked out.
Wow.
Do you know over what?
Well, there was a great deal of looseness. Brothers that attended the Levitical meetings coming home and allowing barbecues and pre-recorded music off Spotify. They weren't even stuck with the Brethren bands. They actually used Spotify, which you got to give it to them. I mean, they're a bit creative. But yeah, this has caused a big rift, and of course there was some new heavies brought up, and they were supposed to go in there and clean it up, and people were like, no, not going to clean it up, we'll just walk.
That's so interesting. Craig, didn't that letter, you're probably more familiar with the contents than me, but didn't that letter that came out say something, and it was like a bit miffed about, how dare the brethren do all this wilderness when there's been such grace shown to us, or there's already generous provision provided to meet all of our needs. And that just cracks me up that, hey, the brethren bands aren't good enough. Like, how dare you listen to Spotify?
And how dare they go camping? I mean, to go camping and enjoy nature that God created. I mean, how awful is that?
I remember when
islands, no less. I mean,
when I was
New Zealand is an island as far as I can see, but
when I was still in there, we got told horror stories about some young brethren that went camping and saw a ghost in the middle of the night. And wasn't that a warning to us all not to go camping?
Oh, that's hilarious.
Been told about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
In Australia, they went out into the bush and they saw this demon up a tree or something.
Oh, it was probably an opossum, seriously.
It might have had something to do with what they were drinking. But
yeah. Well, wasn't it? Isn't it John Spinks's book that's got a chapter about him seeing ghosts in a brethren meeting hall? I mean, that's a terrifying chapter if you believe
it was terrifying.
That's full on, man. I also wanted to jump back to the schooling thing because I don't know if you've heard from any teachers or anything, but my mind is just blown that at someone's word, the whole schooling system across a nation can be closed at 12 hours or less notice. And, what must all the teachers think when they're sort of told, hey, by the way, school's closed tomorrow and for 3 days and, just enjoy your break. They must wonder what on earth, and what does that do to their teaching plan? It was the end of school term here in New Zealand, I think. They would have been gearing up for sorting their kids out for the break, and it's just fascinating. At the Olive-leaf Network, we talk about the high demand hand to try and assess if a group is, a high demand religious group, and it's got these 5 areas: your relationships, your resources, your lifestyle, and your employment and your education. And if all those 5 areas are under significant control from the group, and particularly sort of a daily impact or influence. And that just fascinated me to hear that this area of education, obviously as we use it, it also applies to adult education. But here, obviously, One School Global, we're talking about the kids. But just that, at the click of a finger, that you can close the schools for 3 days. That's a phenomenal level of control. And I just wonder what the teachers think.
Yeah.
Well, and in retrospect, how about all the businesses? So if you were one of the people that spent $4,000 to go there for 6 hours, 8 hours, maybe 10 hours, and you go home and your businesses have been closed.
You're talking about the trade show that they were in.
Or even their businesses, because if the brethren get in vans and, not necessarily all of them have staff that stay behind and keep their business open. You think,
some large brethren businesses had to close on Friday because there weren't enough staff left to run the place.
Yeah. So you think they've invested their travel cost, and they've invested from the loss of school, and they've invested from the loss of sales in their businesses.
Yeah.
To go to one meeting and a party in the tent afterwards.
Yeah, it's a significant cost, isn't it? You got to wonder how many people are not too happy about it. But then again, as I think Peter Hart said in that news article, Craig, if you didn't go, the repercussions would be intense. And while you might not be immediately shut up or anything these days, if you dared to not go, it would be the equivalent of you saying, I don't believe in Bruce Hales. And there would be a huge mark over your head and you would be being watched. People just would not dare to not go.
For the brethren, the end game is to end up in heaven and enjoy eternity, and they believe that Bruce Hales is an extension of God, and therefore to travel to meetings with Bruce Hales is like you're getting early access to heaven. And if you turn that down, like, you're not just insulting Bruce Hales in their eyes, you're refusing the whole concept of God and eternity.
Yeah,
And,
that's so true. You're like directly refusing to hear the current word of the Spirit.
Yeah, and it's like, oh no, I don't want to get a preview of heaven. Like, sorry about it. Like, to them, that's such a. You should sacrifice everything. Like, if you have to go into debt, or if you have to rearrange your mortgage repayments, like, it doesn't matter. Like, to them, this is a window into heaven. So of course you would do everything you physically could to see Bruce Hales.
Yeah, and I mean, practically, you would have angry people on your doorstep the next day. You would have visits from the priests, and you would be interrogated as to why you didn't go, and they'd be questioning your beliefs. And it's kind of a shibboleth, isn't it? It's kind of a test of your loyalty. And, you know, for people who didn't go and didn't have a very, very good excuse, there will be consequences down the line. And now they're just sitting waiting to see what those consequences are going to be.
To point out on, like, how Bruce is trying to see who's being loyal to him, right? I mean, we've talked about this for a long time now. What is his plan going to be to find out where the loyalty lays and where the loyalty doesn't lay? I mean, he has said it out and loud that he knows that, you know, he's the last leader. He says that, and that Aberdeen will probably be another Aberdeen will be experienced underneath his man of God experience he's having. But you just think of this, 24 hours notice. Nobody gets given notice, but 24 hours, right? And what a perfect way to see who is on board with him and who is not on board with him. What other church do you know of? What other mainstream Christian church would do something like this, right? And I mean, I personally know of some insiders in there that just refused to go, right? They didn't go. I hope that they make it, you know, that they get the answers that they want out of this. But I really firmly believe that this is Bruce's method of trying to figure out where the loyalty lays with him in such a harsh, critical time right now that he's having in there, right? I mean, these podcasts, the Olive-leaf network that came forward, all of this has put a huge strain on his ability to be able to control his 50,000 plus members.
It's, you know, calling an urgent fellowship meeting is a less controversial thing to do than to get into bed with a naked woman.
Yeah, exactly.
But a lot more expensive.
We've had insiders say that there's people talking inside there about him making plans on trying to find out where people's loyalty lays. And so you just sit there and you wonder, how is this one of his ways? Is this just, he's just testing theories of finding out who's being loyal to him and who's not, because he's under a lot of duress when he has this kind of controversy floating through everything. It causes him a lot of problems. It really does.
The other thing I would be curious to hear your thoughts on, I hear reports of like really extreme security measures that along with whenever he gets together somewhere, and I find them fascinating. Like I've heard someone tell me recently that sniper points are like checked by a security team, and like all around the halls and wherever Bruce is staying in a house. And that just blew my mind that it is perceived by him as a very genuine threat that he could be taken out by a sniper. Because again, you know, I could be wrong, but maybe I'm not aware of stuff, but I've never heard of any ex-member talk about or in any seriousness actually wanting to kill Bruce Hales. And you'd have to be, very, very desperate, which I understand a lot of ex-brethren are psychologically distressed and have been harmed, but to take that, they're distressed because they want to see their families, and killing Bruce Hales isn't going to fix that. I don't know, what do you guys think? Have you heard some extreme things around the security measures that are taken?
Yeah, but you see, if you drum up and create this like aura of everybody's out to get me and it's so dangerous and all these pressures against me, in one sense it is building up his own ego. You know, to present this that people would want to take him out. We've even been told that in order to have Bruce Hales in your home, you have to have a security team come in and go through your home and check your whole home, check the number of exits, make sure there's an exit, that if a sniper should happen to come in, there's a back exit that he could be rushed out. He takes bodyguards with him. A first-hand account that he takes a non-member bodyguard with him, and in some places where he's gone, the non-member, of course, they don't let them sleep in the same places as members sleep, so they have a little shed out back where the non-member bodyguard sleeps out back. But when they take him to meeting, the bodyguard follows in a vehicle either directly behind or directly in front, just to make sure that he doesn't get harmed on his way to meeting. And by building himself up like that, it makes people think he is so important.
And to me, the people that are out to get him isn't the ex-members. It's the people that are stuck inside there that have no way out because of businesses, have to do with children. I would guarantee there'd be more threat of a member, still a part of the PBCC, in my opinion, to take out Bruce inside there versus any ex-member. We love our life. We're quite happy out here. Yes, we go through stressful times. Yes, we miss our families. But from the people that I talk to inside there and the stories that I hear of what happens inside there, I would be led to believe that it would be more of a member of a PBCC that is stuck in a very tight, hard position because he can't get out of what he's in.
Oh my gosh, Cheryl, you're going to make them paranoid. They'll be like looking at their neighbour and not knowing who to trust.
They'll know what I'm talking about. They'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah, I had heard the thing about exits as well, and at the halls that there's always 2 vehicle exits, and one is like really clear in case it needs to be high speed exit. And we know he does the things to avoid photos and that, right? Like of having a big tent over the entry to the hall so that his blacked out vehicle can drive into the tent, so that like from the street or wherever else, like he cannot be viewed. But yeah, have you heard any other things like about the security, Craig?
Not specifically, but I'm just thinking, like working as a journalist, we often encounter, say, the Prime Minister's security here in New Zealand, and if we have the Prime Minister coming into the newsroom, and bearing in mind, you look at our recent Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who did have a lot of death threats, and there were real threats of violence against her, and I look at the level of security, and it was much more discreet and much more low-key, and it's like, if you've got an actual Prime Minister who's going around with actual death threats against them, and yet they're still prepared to go out and walk around in public and have members of the public approach them. To me, it seems like a lot of these security measures that they're taking for Bruce Hales aren't really about his personal security at all. They're about drumming up an atmosphere of fear and control.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Well, that you wrote, Craig, just recently, and there's a part in here that I do want us to discuss, and you kind of just mentioned it. I'm going to read just a short excerpt out of it. In April 2005, when Clark was left bruised and shaken after an airplane door blew open on a chartered flight, the brethren were told that if we'd been praying harder, Helen Clark would have fallen out of the door, recalls a former member. On another occasion, an effigy of Clark was burned at a Brethren social gathering. I think this is super important that we need to address on this topic. We haven't gone into depth with it before. It is there praying for the removal of people, praying for the deaths of people. Most people will remember my uncle just passed away this July. I haven't talked public about it because I had to myself digest and get through the hurt of what happened and what went down. But they took 110% satisfaction in thanking the saints for their hard work for my uncle's death. And it was one of the hardest things for me to have reported to me. And it goes right here. Here is this is a written article that talks about what they were praying for Helen Clark. And it just absolute infuriates me that a mainstream Christian church with a charity status can sit in there and pray and wish people's death. And when they do die, they take credit for it. It's just not right.
Further on in that same article, Cheryl, there's a reference to when the Greens co-leader Rod Donald did die.
Here's another excerpt in this article, and I'll just read this out. When Greens co-leader Rod Donald died suddenly the night before being sworn in as a part of the new centre-left government, brethren, thank God, members believed his death was an answer to prayer. I have such a plea to the government in any way, shape, or form that there should be no Christian church should have a charity status, even access to charity status, shouldn't have access to their own school, shouldn't have access to, they should not be in this sort of exclusive community when they're teaching principles like this. Like this is, if we were to take, if the Catholic Church was to come out and do something like this, it would be all over the news, absolutely spread all over the news. That this is, these children get up and pray on Monday night for the removal of people. Like they're teaching people that this is okay. It just blows my mind. When I got the phone call after my uncle passed away, I had never been so gutted in all of my life. I literally felt someone had ripped my heart out, that these people actually, and guess what their next comment was? My first uncle passed away almost a year ago to the day. Then this uncle passed away. And guess what their word was? Cheryl's next, right? They know who they're going after. So for me, obviously, you can't kill me that easily. Trust me. You just can't. So, I mean, you guys can wipe that right off your prayer agenda now that I don't go down like that. But it blows my mind that these people can get away with this. And I don't know what we do about it.
To put it in context, your uncle was a witness in a potential sexual abuse prosecution, which is why they were so pleased that it passed. Yeah.
So he had the same abuser as I did, and he had made a police statement, and it was someone this is so hard for me to talk about because it makes me so emotional that he never got to have his day in court. And it also, for them, it's just for them to actually take credit was just, I couldn't believe it. I can't believe my parents are a part of this. I can't believe my brothers are a part of this. I can't believe that they have this thought pattern that their prayers are killing people.
Yeah, that's really devastating to hear, Cheryl, and my heart breaks for you. I can't imagine how awful that is to hear that. I think it is testament to, it's why when we have, their spokesperson in New Zealand, Doug Watt, say, oh, we're a mainstream Christian church. It's why it makes statements like that just such a joke. Because, there's no mainstream Christian church that's encouraging its flock to pray for the death of those who threaten it or who are claiming that any such deaths are as a result of, divine intervention and blessing on their part. It's very unmainstream. And, high demand or cult-like groups do... They have a huge us and them thing, as we know, right? They have a huge us and them divide, and I guess what you're seeing is the pointy end or the extreme end of what happens when groups create extreme categories of us and them and start to demonize anybody who tries to hold them to account. Because that's all this is, in your sexual abuse situation, you're not just like out to attack them because it's a fun idea for you or because you're a bully. You are trying to set right a very, very serious case of abuse that has gone completely not held to account and with no restitution or anything, and the person who was at fault is still at large. That is all you're trying to do, and yet in their mind, or for any organisation like this, they view accountability as attack and persecution. That's like an insight into their mentality here, and that must be incredibly distressing to see people like your own flesh and blood family caught up into that mentality.
Yeah. My heart breaks for those children that are being trained like this, right? We think of where all this bullying comes from in their schools. We hear the stories of the absolute language and what they say to people outside of their congregation and how they talk to people. Well, it stems from literally you guys them getting up Monday night and praying for the removal of people. They literally believe that they have this power to be the ones that say who can be on this earth and who can't be on this earth, right? It's just
it's important to go back to what the outlook of prayer normally would be. And I think that if you go to any church, not even a mainstream church, they would say if you're going to pray, about a tough situation, you would pray that someone gets help or someone gets a change of mind, or that you can help somebody. You pray for your enemies. You pray that they will get help. You don't pray for their death. It's such a contradictory teaching. Yeah.
This is, I think, another important part of that is to look at the pattern of the brethren. It's not, when it comes to death and prayer, it's not just the enemies that die. They also believe that they die if God wants to send them a message. Yeah. The number of times that a young brethren Christian was killed in a car crash, and then we were told, oh, that was God speaking to us because we weren't following the rules. And I read my great-grandmother's diaries from the 70s when there would be some terrible car crash, or even like your father's death, Carmen, and it's all, what is God saying to us? Why has God killed this person? What message is he trying to send us? And that whole idea that there is a God that is just sitting there smiting down not only our enemies, but also people that we care about if we're not listening.
It's a very punitive...
It's a long way from what most Christians would understand prayer to be.
Yeah, it's a very punitive and fear-based God, isn't it? And actually, it's a bit inappropriate to make a joke probably, but seeing as so many brethren grew up reading Far Side comics in the breaks when they were bored, it reminds me of that Far Side one where God's got this enormous grand piano over top of someone's head and he's about to drop it. No, he's pressing the smite button, isn't he? He's got the smite button and there's this grand piano about to just go boom on someone's head. But seriously, that is kind of the view of God that they've got.
Yeah. I may have talked about this last time I came on the podcast, but might as well repeat the story. Not long.
Oh, we've lost him.
Yeah. Well, wait for him to come back.
They've got him.
I think it's important in what you were saying to remember it's not a punishment when something bad happens. Bad things happen to everybody. It happens to good people. It happens to bad people. And it's not necessarily a punishment. It's what helps us grow. Go ahead, Craig. Now you're unfrozen.
We lost you. You're going to tell us a story.
Bad day for my internet. I'm sorry. When I was leaving in Invercargill just in the last few weeks, a brethren couple took me out for lunch to a restaurant and begged me to stay in fellowship, and I said no, that I was going to leave. And the following evening, one of the waitresses from the restaurant was killed in a car crash on the way home. And I've never forgotten the husband of the couple came round and he talked to me at work, and he just had this almost triumphant look on his face, telling me about this teenage waitress that had been killed in a car crash, because surely this was a message from God that I needed to stay in the brethren. And I just thought the very idea that God would be out there killing some teenage waitress that I didn't even know to send me a message that I should stay in fellowship was I couldn't believe it then, and I still can't believe it.
Well, I mean, it brings me back to the thing that I often say is that the brethren aren't actually that acquainted with scriptures, because there's a whole lot of scriptures, just even in the Gospels themselves, that totally contradict all this theology. Like the classic one is the man in John 9 and the blind guy, and the disciples bring him to Jesus and say, did he sin or did his parents sin that he's, had this calamity of being born blind? And Jesus said neither of them. It's just so that, the works of God can be shown, or something like that. And going back to the praying for your enemies, like Jesus himself, who is supposedly the one who shows us God, said to pray for your enemies and bless them. And so you're like, come on, people, you're claiming to be Christians and to be mainstream churches. Like, why don't you go and have a wee read of the Gospels and start looking a wee bit more like Jesus, please?
The brethren don't really like the Gospels. They're much more at home in the epistles, aren't they? The Gospels are a bit of a sideshow.
Well, I think they're more at home in Leviticus.
Well, that's true. Yeah, it's a bit of selective reading goes on, I think.
Yeah. Hey, jumping back to the security thing, I have had reports from a relatively recent leader who had familiarity with the security side of things, who said that it was fairly common for a locality that was going to host Bruce Hales to face a bill of around New Zealand $200,000. And that would involve all that sort of thing of staking out and checking through the properties, this updating the security cameras and all that type of thing. So, yeah, that's a tremendous bill for a locality to hold. And again, I'm wondering, is that all funneled through their charitable trusts, things like that? These are incredible bills, aren't they, for localities to have to fork out to supposedly protect Bruce Hales. And I also have had relatively recent leavers share with me some stories about just before Bruce Hales was due to visit, having a 360-degree eye camera inserted in the main part, the centre of the main hall. So I don't know if any people who were at the meetings in Palmy noticed this, but apparently it was very discreet, like it was almost impossible to see kind of with the naked eye unless you were really, really looking for it set in the tiles of the ceiling. But, just perhaps a word of warning for some of those people in those conferences who like to pick their noses in public and things. But, you're on camera, whatever you do. So take care.
This wasn't a big camera that you could notice. It was concealed.
Yeah.
Yes, it was very, very discreet. Apparently, it was actually embedded in through the ceiling, and with just a tiny bit of the eye kind of visible in the ceiling tiles, which, the ceiling roofs are quite high, especially in the centre.
Yeah, that would mean, for instance, that if any pictures did come out from inside the hall, they would be able to go back and review the footage and see who had perhaps taken the picture.
Yeah, in theory, I have no idea, obviously, of the quality of the footage that's being taken, because if you've got thousands of people, it's going to perhaps still be quite challenging to, pick through it and see who was taking a photo. But yeah, I think there's definitely a word of warning there for that people are probably being videoed much more than they realise. I mean, for all we know, there's video cameras in the toilets and the showers. Oh no, there's no showers, is there? But yeah.
So do we think that this camera is this camera in all of the meeting halls, or it was just put in there because Bruce was going there?
Yeah, in this case, this was several years ago now, this specific instance in Auckland before Bruce was due to arrive. So I imagine if that was standard practice several years ago, it's most likely to be the same, if not more so now, especially as camera technology has advanced. And back then, that camera alone was worth several $1,000s and had been, properly installed up through the ceiling.
And if you really think about it, now, do you think there's that many more security risks than there was, say, 50 years ago? Like, you think back to JHS in Nitchie, he lived, down that little driveway, but it was nothing for him to get in his wheelchair and for one of his sons to push him all the way down the driveway and all the way up to the meeting room. No security guards, no bodyguards, no security cameras. I mean, really? Is the risk that great now?
Yeah, it does speak to, two things, doesn't it? One is that, as you guys have already said, there's this desire to portray to the brethren that he's in grave danger, and to kind of build it up and justify the private jet and the private helicopter that we've heard multiple accounts of him using a private helicopter to fly around in. Or, the other thing it points to me is somebody who is incredibly paranoid or has a very, very disturbed conscience that, some chickens are going to come home to roost, he's...
I would say it's the latter.
Yeah. On the topic of security, I do think that when it comes to these special meetings, it's important to point out as well that he's not just being protected from the world, he is also being protected from the brethren themselves. So he walks up and down designated aisles, and they have designated guards stationed at the end of each aisle. And so it's physically impossible for anybody in that hall to directly approach Bruce Hales. It's to stop people from directly approaching him, to have an unplanned, unscheduled conversation with him. And so all of the people on ends of the aisles are handpicked specifically to stop members from approaching Bruce Hales for a conversation he's not expecting.
Oh, wow.
So what pattern do you use to support that idea? I mean, you go through the scriptures, the Lord had no problem talking to anybody. He didn't have to have special prearranged conversations with people. If you're the man of God, you're representing the Lord here on earth. Why do you have to have conversations pre-scheduled? And why do you have to be protected from the innocent person that might have a question to ask you?
But if you're the leader, your flock should be able to access you. I have this image in my mind of a video that I watched one time when the Pope came. I don't know where he was going, and him walking along and shaking everybody's hands, right? Yeah. Could you imagine Bruce doing that to his flock? Them all lining up to see him and him shaking everybody's hands.
Yeah.
Not going to happen. Right? I don't know. My mind is just, again, it gets blown every time I do one of these podcasts, but today it really is, in the sense that I just don't see how, I don't get how these people have a charity status. I just don't. I just don't. And I used to believe, I really honestly used to believe, call me naive, call me gullible, but I used to believe that this church might be salvageable. I do not believe that anymore from from the reports that come from out of there now. I don't believe that. I think it's far too diseased. I think this needs to crumble to the ground. And to all the people that are inside there are plenty of gorgeous, beautiful, compassionate churches around you that would receive you with open arms, that you'd be able to 100% be able to understand what Christianity is like truly. Don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of the PBCC falling down. There is a ton of churches out here that they'll grab you. They will hold you. They will comfort you. They will nurture you back to health.
And where the leaders are very approachable and will talk to you anytime you walk up to them at church.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lindy.
We did hear, I don't really know what Bruce actually taught about at these meetings, because unlike the brethren might like to think, I don't have loads of moles or anything like that in there. And people who are leaving, who we're supporting through Olive-leaf Network, we're just primarily supporting them. We don't actually pick over them and dig them for information. But so, I don't actually know really, why he taught at those meetings, but we did hear reports that on Wednesday he spoke about treating people with care and compassion, and possibly even, I'm not sure about this, but treating former members with care and compassion, which if so, that's fascinating, because we had quite a few reports of people who the week before were getting quite nasty messages from family members, saying that they were, going to hell and all that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden on Wednesday after 5:00, they were getting messages or phone calls saying, "Oh, how are you?" Just sort of send a message of love and care. And, again, I just thought this is bonkers that, again, why did the people have to wait to be told from the leader to show care and compassion? Come on, people,
Yeah.
So I'm going to share it. Definitely, he probably wasn't talking about this then. We don't think he was. I'll just share some of his other teachings. So this is just we perused and grabbed some his old teachings here from 2005.
You drink for strength.
Yeah, so this is someone asking, well, we have a difficulty with mid-afternoon preachings. And Bruce says, is that because they've had too much to drink in the break? And this person says, well, they're both pensive and pious, I suppose. Bruce says, we won't use another word. I think it would be more applicable than pious. See, there's probably too much... What's this?
Pissed? Does he mean pissed?
Maybe. See, there's probably too much alcohol served in the breaks at lunchtime. That's what I think. We went through many years where we didn't have any alcohol. Our beloved brother used to emphasize that you drink for strength, not for drunkenness. Young people addicting themselves to hard liquor is foolish. Utter foolishness, apart from being dangerous to your health and to the lives of public on the roads. And then here's another
context there. RSK there is Dr. Kirkpatrick.
Oh, really? It's Roger Kirkpatrick?
Yeah.
Roger Stephen Kirkpatrick.
Yeah.
But can we just, like, the confusing thing is that you've got this teaching here, and then you've got what happened last week with the how many
That's what I mean.
$1,000 worth of alcohol did you say, Carmen?
$100,000 worth.
$100,000 worth of alcohol, and that would not happen without categorically being instructed by Bruce Hales. So the man is such a complexity, isn't he? Because, and people do often talk about this, I hear them talking about it, how some people say they've experienced him being kind to them or being generous. You know, there's multiple accounts of him giving out $50 or $1,000 here or there, or other people who have said, oh, he was genuinely kind to me. So you do get kind of these times when he seems to be more of a trustworthy or sensible or sane kind of leader. And then on the other hand, you've got just as many stories of him being brutish or being a bully or Craig, you've talked about witnessing him just throwing back tumblers of whiskey in a break, right? Like, you know what? He's a complexity, isn't he?
Everybody's toes that way, right? Like, I do want to just read out this one last one here on the bottom. Certain unacceptable features based on irrefutable witness and universal reports are as follows: excessive drinking, alcohol at meeting rooms and precincts. Like, think of what they just did in Palmy with all the alcohol in the meeting rooms, which back in 2005 was an absolute no-no, right? Like, I do think that that's how he keeps them going, is by this push-pull that I was referring to before. It's a rule, it's not a rule. It's a rule, it's not a rule. And it shows them, these people then become these marionettes and these puppets of what he's allowing and what he's not allowing. He's able to exert his control in a way and see who's with me, who isn't with me. Right? He's always getting to know. Whereas let's go back to Mr. Simonton, right? I mean, I don't remember a whole lot of his era, but I don't remember rules coming in and rules going out, rules coming in, rules coming out, right? It was just one set of rules that you followed and you didn't steer away from them, right? Whereas Bruce has come in and it's very much this yo-yo effect of, tightens them up and then he gives them freedom. I remember the first time I had talked to my mom and she had said, oh, Cheryl, this is after Bruce got in there. And because I was part of John Hales's reign. And when Bruce came in, oh, Cheryl, everything has changed. It's so different. You know what? The young children, there's so much more that you get to do. It's so different in here. And I'm like, you know what? I'm happy for you that it's good for you, but I would never in a million years ever step foot back inside something like that again. Yeah. But it gives them this feeling of clamping down and then giving the freedom, clamping down and then giving them the freedom. Very cult-like, very cult-like.
He is, which is what Craig said that Professor Lynham had said, that that's a classic kind of thing that leaders of high demand groups do. But yeah, I mean, it is pretty clear that they're making the cage more and more and more golden and adding more and more little swings and bells for the people to play with. But it's still a cage, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, so that was 20 years ago. It was that you weren't allowed alcohol in the car park, and fast forward 20 years and you're serving $100,000 worth of alcohol. It just makes me think, okay, in 20 years' time, what, will they be handing out condoms in the car parks?
I mean,
the Lord turned another corner. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember when I was a teenager, they talked about the Lord turning a corner, and we used to joke that the Lord had turned so many corners, he must be dizzy by now.
It's true.
Yes.
It is true.
Yes.
I do want to bring up your other article that you wrote, Craig, because it was an incredible, and this is for the insiders that might not have access or not know about what went on in Palmerston, because we do know that some of them had no clue that was happening there. And so I'm just going to share your other article that you did. So this is an article that's called Private Jets, Prison Vans in Palmy, Inside the World of Last Minute Brethren National Gathering. Do you want to just walk the viewers and listeners through this, Craig?
Yeah, so this is just nothing spectacular about it, really. This is just a pulling together of everything that happened and what the reasons were behind it, how the meetings unfolded at a logistical level, how the Brethren got there, the impact that it had on things like the travel network, what usually happens at these kinds of meetings. So none of this will be particularly surprising to anyone who's in the Brethren, but what this is really is an explanation for people out of the Brethren as to just what on earth was going on and what it means for the Brethren.
Incredible article. I thought you did such a great job of covering absolutely every angle you could on here. So it is, if you haven't read this article, there'll be a link attached to both articles in the description of this podcast. And it would be, it's very good to read this.
Yeah, it was brilliantly done, Craig. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it was so well done. So well done. One of the best articles I've read covering everything in a long time. That was so good.
He is a very good journalist.
You are. We're very grateful that you found that path after leaving.
I have to ask, what was the reaction to the pictures as they were taken?
I am not entirely sure on that front. From memory, the Brethren are usually told to ignore photographers and journalists now, because in previous years, we'd be going back sort of 15 years or so, there were some quite unpleasant interactions between Brethren outside halls with journalists and photographers, and I think the lesson from there has been to ignore them.
Well, thank you, Craig and Lindy, for joining us and giving us some insight into the Palmerston North Fellowship meetings. And thank you so much, Craig, for the articles that you wrote. I will attach all of that down below in the description. And we are pleading with our viewers to please make sure you subscribe. You actually have to hit the subscribe button. Where you see we're at 700 and some subscribers, we need that to go up. We need it to hit 1,000. So can you please, if you're inside, create a fake account and watch us from that fake account. We need the subscribers, and like and comment our video. Thank you guys for joining us today, and until next time, much love to everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
If you are in a high-demand religious group and need help, please go to olive-leaf.network. To share your story or be a guest on the show, email info.getalife@proton.me. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to Get a Life, and comment.